Hello and welcome, my name is Tron Hoshiko, and today's video is all about how to photograph and film homeless people. With people in economic distress, displacement from houses, apartments, and supportive services, people being laid off in the tens of thousands, benefits being cut, and uncountable amounts of medical debt, people that are often elderly, disabled, veterans, students, single moms, teens, people of color, LGBTQ people, victims of abuse, folks who are working multiple jobs still without housing, or people who are otherwise multi-intersection minorities are struggling. And so there are so many potentially dramatic stories that could be told by people with cameras and microphones. But instead, keep the lens cap on and don't do it. Homeless people are vulnerable to many, many things in our world, from literally surviving in terms of access to food and access to medicine, weather being too hot or too cold, violence from strangers ranging from mental and physical to sexual and political, and when you are literally sleeping rough with a sleeping bag or a tent if you're lucky, the ground is still hard, sounds around you are constant and interrupt any rest that you could have, and anybody could be a danger. If you haven't been in that situation, there is no way to fully understand what that is like. In many places, policies are even being pushed to make blankets outdoors illegal, something that is literally deadly for unhoused people. I always wonder if the people who rail against unhoused people and demonize them would be willing to sleep on their own floor for 2 weeks in a safe, warm, and private home and just see how difficult on the body even that can be in a controlled environment. The last thing someone who is trying to survive day to day needs is someone with a camera wasting their limited energy. Another thing is that exploitation of homeless people is rampant. They are exploited on different scales constantly, most visibly as political pawns, usually maliciously. But people also get homeless people to come and work for them doing household jobs like lawn care, or even work at a restaurant in the kitchen, and then they stiff them, leaving them with all that lost time, lost energy, and no extra money. And the people who do this know that homeless people don't have the same ability to report wage thefts, mostly because who would care? Who would care? Who would stand up for them? And the exploiters do this for their own profit. Can you imagine working all day while hungry, spending your little energy, knowing your only rest will be on hard ground or in a shelter if you're lucky, all in the hope of a little money that will aid your survival for another day even, only to have that stolen from you? As I mentioned moments ago, sexual abuse is also common, and that's another dynamic of exploiting people who need food, money, and shelter. And there are even types of religious exploitation where vulnerable people are only offered food, shelter, or support if they submit to religious participation they may not want for their lives. It's important to consider that a homeless person's ability to appropriately consent is challenged by the fact that they literally might not have anywhere else to go to exist, and that they have needs of food and water and shelter, and that there's this ever-present risk of violence from random people. So standing up to somebody demanding to film or photograph you could even risk violence. And even if not, coercion happens because of power structures and differences in power level. And my third point is simply privacy is something that everyone deserves. And homeless people oftentimes are very publicly visible and are afforded very little privacy. And invading their privacy helps contribute to dehumanization, especially in media. You would not want someone coming to your front door and filming you and expecting things of you, or filming you through your windows when you try to tell them, no, don't film me. So we shouldn't do that to others where they live, even if that is a park, an abandoned lot, or on the street. As people with cameras, we have a responsibility to be respectful. So if you are thinking of telling these stories, you might be well intentioned, but there are far better ways to genuinely help that don't risk exploiting a very vulnerable population. You really don't want to be someone who makes poverty porn. No one should be gleeful in seeing someone at their low just so that they can quote unquote help while the camera's on for a few minutes. We all know those types of videos where someone gives a homeless person a $1 hot dog and $10 and acts like it's life-changing and then stands around filming them, expecting a huge reaction or for them to perform their whole life story for the sake of that person's content. Those videos are always uncomfortable because that's not selfless. It's not genuine help or care, and they're exploiting someone who basically has nowhere else to go. And don't even get me started on the horrific exploitation of bum fight type videos. That is a whole other level of cruelty that is just disgusting to know exists. Instead, if you genuinely want to help people, here are a few ideas. You can carry hand warmers. I bought 10 for $11 at Walmart a few weeks ago and have already handed out about 8 of them. I keep them in my car's glove box and hand them out when I see people at stoplights and stop signs. You can also carry spare $5 bills to hand out in the same way. You can donate to food banks in your area, and you can find one in your area using feedingamerica.org. Usually cash is best as they can buy in bulk like grocery stores, and many have the buying power of $10 for every $1 they receive. And this also helps them buy non-food supplies like diapers, period products, toothpaste, pet food, and more that people don't necessarily remember are necessities beyond food itself. You can also volunteer your own time at food banks or homeless outreach programs. They're always looking for more volunteers. You can support affordable, low income, and subsidized housing initiatives that keep people housed in the first place. You can volunteer for an org that helps homeless people get their IDs replaced. Lost identification is a major roadblock for unhoused people to getting support services, jobs, and housing, especially after cruel homeless sweeps throw away all of their personal possessions. If you've not yet read ProPublica's Housing Sweep Note Card project, it is so important and powerful, and it has the words of the victims themselves. I'll link that down in the video's description. Seriously, please give it a read. You can support minimum wage increases in your area, and if you live in a place that has disabled people getting a lower minimum wage, you can help end that policy. It's awful and keeps people in extra poverty. You can oppose blanket bans and sitting bans. And if you don't have anything to give in this moment, even a wave or a hello, just something simply to show human dignity to people that are often literally ignored and treated as invisible. And never just blame homeless people for their situation. At very best, that's a misunderstanding of how larger societal forces work, and at worst, it is societal permission for people to mistreat and act with malice towards unhoused people. There are so many ways to help, even in small but tangible ways, so this is definitely not a comprehensive list by any means. You also don't have to be perfect, or know everything about the situation, or strive to fix the problem in some grandiose way. That is impossible as an average individual. But you can help. If everyone contributed in small ways, things would be a lot better. And if you are doing something, be a leader. Tell others and encourage them to help in ways that are accessible to them. Sometimes people just need a little advice on where to start. Generally, talking about these issues, their causes, and the ways to help in small and big ways without centering ourselves as saviors helps build broader support for people in need. If you are still wanting to work with unhoused people in immediate capacity, through an organization that is directly assistive is best. And with that, reaching out to an organization and offering to help with their immediate needs if they ever want it allows for that decision to be made by the people who know the situation best. I'd guess that 9.8 times out of 10, they'd rather have you volunteer your time directly helping the mission instead. If you do end up doing some media work for an organization, focus on conveying unhoused people's voices about their own stories rather than your own narrative about homeless people, especially as homeless people are not a monolith. I find this to be a core principle in documentary filmmaking, anyways, and also I'm generally excluding legitimate journalism in this discussion. And with organizations, you do still have to be wary. The risk of exploitation is usually much lower, but it's not non existent. And that is the last thing we want to do if we genuinely want to help vulnerable people. If something feels exploitive or antithetical to a proposed mission statement of helping, it probably is, and therefore is best not to engage with. Privacy, consent, respect, and care for these people in these situations are the most important values to hold. Of course, if you're out filming or photographing and a homeless person asks you to take their photo or video, especially if you have an actual relationship with the individual, that can be fine as long as you use or share it appropriately. If you have a photo that happens to have an unhoused person in it, but their situation is not the main subject, like maybe a photo that's in the park or something of the sort, I generally would think that's okay as long as you weren't targeting them. People of all kinds like to have their photo taken, but everyone deserves privacy, consent, and respect. Remember that at the core, even if you haven't considered it previously, these people are vulnerable humans that are your neighbors in your community, regardless of how differently they might live compared to you. Truly, a little bit of kindness, recognition, and support goes a long way in making the world a better place for everyone. And we all have the power to share kindness with others. Down in the video's description are links to some sources that you can use to grow your understanding and education surrounding these topics, as well as a link to where you can find food banks near you, whether that might be for you, someone in your life who needs them, or so that you can make a contribution that supports your community. That's feedingamerica.org. If you don't have one near you that you want to contribute to, I will also have some links to ones near me, and specifically a link to an org that I like that provides weekend meals for children when they're not at school. That's coloradofriendship.org. If you do end up donating anywhere, you can email me your receipt to trendonhoshiko.cinematography@gmail.com, and I will give you a shout out in an upcoming video, just like I do with my Patreon supporters. As always, thank you so much for watching. Try to do something kind for someone this week, and I hope you have a wonderful week ahead of you. Peace.